For as long as I can remember, I've always had this problem of struggling to get my ass off the chair just to go and study. There was always this constant tug of war in my mind of wanting to do what I know I should do and creating 1,001 excuses not to do them. Well, that was until I discovered this 6 simple but effective mindset shifts that actually helped me to change the game completely. Studying for exams while I was in medical school was a whole lot easier, and honestly, if you have anything study related, I believe it's going to actually have the same effect on you. Chapter 1. Making a decision. Now, one of the many reasons why we find it difficult to study is because more often than not, you haven't made the decision to actually study. Now, I'm sure you might be like, wait, how can you say I have not decided to study? Are you trying to gaslight me? Well, before you go about thinking that, let me tell you something.
Let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. All right. Let me tell you something.
First of all, what does this word decision mean? Decision actually stems from 2 words. Decidere from Greek, which means determine, and scission, which means to cut. Now, if you combine this together, it gives us something called determined cutting. So when you actually go about saying, I have decided to do something, what you are inadvertently saying is that you have decided to cut off all other options, leaving just that one thing that you've decided on. Now, when you say, I have decided to be with this person, what you are actually saying is that you have decided to cut off all other potential partners. The major reason why we might find it hard to study is because even though we think we have decided to study, there are still a lot of options still vying for our attention. And because those windows are still open, it makes it difficult to actually focus on just that one thing. Probably could be leaving the door open for TikTok, WhatsApp, your friends, or that movie you've had your eye out for to watch for the longest time. Now, one big hack that I like to use to decide is when I decide to study, I make sure that there are only 2 options. Either I study or I am left with utter and complete boredom. Chapter 2. Have a stronger why. Now, another reason why we may find it difficult to get off our asses is because the reason that you have to get off your ass is not strong enough to fight your urge to lie down on the bed and just scroll on TikTok or something. And that is usually a pointer to the fact that you might not have a strong enough why, a strong enough reason to actually go through the pain of studying. Now, one of the hacks that I use to actually create a strong enough why is by using something called anti-goals. Now, what are anti-goals? Anti-goals are basically goals, but in reverse. What do I mean by this? I don't know about you, but negative things actually tend to make me more serious. I might need to get that checked out, but if I need to study for an exam and I'm trying to figure out a good why, I just imagine how life would be like if I continue down that trajectory. If I decide to not study for that exam and I fail the exam, and if I still not push myself to study, I would eventually find myself out of school. And when I am out of school, that might actually bring shame upon my family. Although this may sound a bit traditional, but because of the shame, it will have a ripple effect on my self-esteem. Honestly, this is kind of like a rundown summary of what I think about, but like I really go deep into it. And when I think about that anti-goal, it's so clear in my head that I want to avoid that at all costs. It's usually actually a strong enough why than maybe thinking of acing the exam. But in essence, finding your why requires you to think about the big picture. It forces you to actually create a vision of what you want, and in my case, of what you don't want. And when you are able to see the big picture vision, you are more equipped in the moment to make the right decisions, like going to study. King Solomon once said, without vision, the people cast off restraint. Chapter 3. Location, location, location. Now, some people tend to have this view that all reading should be done at the library. Honestly, I feel that that's a really hyper-inflated view on the location that you do your studying, but I cannot deny the wisdom in having a predetermined place that is specifically for studying. Even though I can literally count the number of times I actually visited the library while I was in medical school, I still had my little table in my room. Even though I watched movies in my room, I did a lot of things in my room, my table was actually meant for the important stuff like studying or doing something that required a lot of mental activity. And now why this is important is because when you actually mentally associate an action with a particular place, when you're in that place, it makes it a whole lot easier to do that action compared to doing something else. Some people actually use this to their own disadvantage, because sometimes if we make the mistake of associating, let's say, your bed with studying, it will make it a whole lot difficult to actually use your bed for what it was meant for, which is for sleeping. When you have the correct associations with places, it makes it faster and easier to do the activities that you associate that place with. Number 4, lower expectations. Another reason why we may find it difficult to study is because you might have ridiculously high expectations. If the mere thoughts of studying creates a picture of 4 to 6 hours of sitting down in one place, hammering away on a particular page or pages of a book, honestly, that picture alone is even making me feel tired at this point, because But instead, if you were to actually lower your expectations and just say, okay, I'm going to study for 15 minutes, it's going to be a whole lot easier to actually get off your ass to study than if you still maintain that picture of 4 to 6 hours of just pain and drudgery. Chapter 5, break tasks down. There is a really popular African proverb that says, there is only one way to eat an elephant, and that is one bite at a time. Now, sometimes we may see studying for an exam as this mountain that we need to conquer. It makes doing that activity a lot more difficult and repulsive compared to if you actually break it down to its component parts. Now, instead of saying you need to finish an entire textbook to study for an exam effectively, you can actually just break it down to telling yourself that you only need to read one paragraph in that topic. Or you could even break it further. This is to actually saying you only need to read one sentence. And honestly, if you actually really hone in on reading just one sentence, you would find yourself eventually reading way more than one sentence. Because the main problem is not maintaining the momentum, but rather to start the engine in the first place. It's actually just like riding a bike. The biggest effort is actually not in keeping the bike going, but actually getting the bike to move. Chapter 6, self-talk. The most important human voice in your life is not the voice of your mother, is not the voice of your father, it's not the voice of your pastor or religious leader if you're into that. It's actually the voice in your head. That little voice that tells you you're not good enough. That voice that is constantly in your head that you have to deal with during your waking hours, 7 days of every week. Now, this may sound a bit new age, but the voice in your head and the language you speak to yourself to a large extent affects how you feel about any activity, and that includes studying. And one simple way that I've discovered to actually change this self-talk is by replacing a very simple but powerful word, and that is the word but. Now, you may be wondering, how does this work? Let's say you have a test that is due in 3 days, and for some reason you do not feel like studying for that test. An average person would say, I have a test in 3 days, but I am tired and I don't feel like studying for this test. Now, a more refined way of actually stating that situation to yourself is by saying, I have a test in 3 days and I am tired and I don't feel like it. Now, that's change. It's so subtle that you may not even realize that it's a change. But the main difference is that when you use the word but, that word but actually makes the condition look more insurmountable than it actually is. But when you use the word and, it makes that situation more of a challenge that can be overcome than something that is insurmountable when you use the word but. This concept might be a lot to take in, I understand, but these little subtle changes in your self-talk can to a large extent lead to significant changes in your behavior and how you see things literally overnight. Our wisdom nugget for the week: if you wait for perfect conditions, you will never get anything done. And guys, if you like this video, I think you're gonna love this video about how to be effortlessly disciplined. And if any point in this video resonated with you, I would love to see what you think in the comment section. And with that, guys, remember to always keep it real. Bye, guys.